Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here, and welcome to the Dungeon Dive's Top 50 Dungeon Crawl and Adventure Games as of March 2022, as unscientifically chosen in a comparative choice system and subject to change at will. Is that enough qualifiers there? So I'm doing a top 50. And I use the Pub Meeple's ranking engine, and I inputted a list of about 200 different games that I have played enough that I feel comfortable judging. I'm only doing a top 50 instead of a top 100 because I don't think I've played a big enough variety of games enough times to really give a top 100 that would be valuable. The bottom 50 would just kind of be 50 more games that I like. So a top 50, I kind of had to do some culling, and the top 50 was a little more meaningful, I think, than the bottom 50. And again, this is completely in jest. I mean, if I were to do this ranking system again today, even just doing it today, I did it a couple weeks ago, a lot of these games would be in different places. I did it quickly. I did it on a whim. I just kind of went in there and I sat down, put on some music, and just started judging games against one another. And it built a list of the top 100 from the 200. And then I took out the bottom 50. And so you guys are going to get the top 50. As usual in these kinds of lists, we're going to do 10 at a time per episode. And those are going to be coming out over the next month. One of the reasons why I'm doing this now is because my board game, my time to devote to playing and learning new and different board games is very limited right now because of Elden Ring. All of my gaming free time right now is spent playing video games, and that is going to be the truth for probably a couple months. So I am actually going to do also some videos on Elden Ring because there is some intersectionality between dungeon crawling board games and the Dark Souls style video games. And I've run it by my patrons, and they are all about it. They really want to hear my thoughts on Elden Ring and Dark Souls and that kind of stuff. So speaking of the Dungeon Dive patron, if you can and you are not yet, I would really appreciate you joining the Dungeon Dive patron at a $3 or $5 a month. It really helps a lot, especially right now since I'm took this new job and I'm not making very much money at all. It's been pretty tough, but we're getting by. So if you can help support the Dungeon Dive financially, that would be great. So, all right, well, let's get into this. So like I said, this is going to be a top 50, and all of these games are somehow related to dungeon crawling or adventure games. I'm not including like straight Euro or normal games in this top 50. So this is a straight top 50 dungeon crawl and adventure games. All right, so number 50, let's kick things off with Runebound 3rd Edition, and that is from 2015 Fantasy Flight Games designer Lucas Litzinger. This is, of course, with the qualifier of with the Unbreakable Bonds co-op expansion. I do think that this game did a really good job of incorporating solid co-op threat management style game mechanisms within an adventure game frame. It has an interesting world to explore and cool things to encounter. There are a lot of different things that crop up while you are playing the game. It has a completely unique combat system, which I totally failed to mention in my last episode of what I talk about when I talk about dungeon diving and combat. I totally meant to mention Runebound's weird pog system, where when you get a new weapon, you get a little pog and you actually like flip them, and depending on what space they land on or what side they land on, face up, face down, different things can happen. It's kind of like a little puzzly aspect of the game. And it's unique. I'm not sure it's great, but it is totally unique. And one negative thing, I'm going to do like a few positive things and then a little negative thing about the game, just to kind of like temper the list a little bit. But it lacks all of the great expansions and the kind of sandboxy nature of second edition, which will be appearing later on this list. Okay, so let's see here. Now we have number 49. And number 49 is a game that I have been meaning to get on the channel for a really long time. And I need to get off my butt and do it. And that is Dungeoneer. And this is a whole series of card-based dungeon crawls. I have chosen Tomb of the Lich Lord from 2003. Designer Thomas Denmark as the representative for Dungeoneer. So 2003, that's kind of like the before times, before Kickstarter, before we had just an embarrassment of riches of dungeon crawl and adventure games. During these times, pickings were pretty slim. I mean, we had like Descent, second edition, or first edition, I mean. Runebound, Games Workshop wasn't really producing anything at this time as far as board games go. There weren't a ton of really cool fantasy, adventure, and dungeon crawl games, so pickings were slim. And I picked this up on a whim, thinking, what could it hurt? A little card game, tiny little boxes, and it's a really cool system. It's one of the better competitive dungeon crawl games because it actually is competitive. You are working in the dungeon, you are gaining glory points and peril points as you move from room to room. Glory points you can spend to play cards from your hand that help your character. Peril points, other players can spend your peril points on you to play traps and monsters and curses and stuff. Really interesting system that I would love to see implemented in more games, and I'm really surprised that it has not. It has good expansions, all kinds of different decks that you can add in to go on different adventures. And it also has some really good fan support with a very good solo variant that I'll get to the channel eventually. It also has really good art, and I think like almost 100% or almost 100% is done by the designer Thomas Denmark. One negative is that it can be a little long for what it is. And so thinking of ways to speed up the game would actually benefit. Number 48 coming up is from 2019 and Plaid Hat Games, and that is Aftermath from designer Jerry Hawthorne. So Aftermath is a really cool post-apocalyptic critter crawl. You're playing little mice, you're playing little critters. Watership Down meets dungeon crawl, think of it like that, with a ton of charm. The world that Jerry created is just inviting, even though it's post-apocalyptic and it's a little dark. It's just such an evocative world that I like to be in. It has a unique card playing system for action and action selection, and you're playing these cards in a hand that you will gain more action points to do certain actions. And it has a great campaign system that isn't super long, but offers interesting quests with some base building in between the quests. So at the beginning, at the introduction to this series, I did mention that these are games that I feel like I've played enough to judge. I have not finished the campaign for Aftermath. That is something I want to remedy. That is sadly a fact with a lot of the campaign games that I play. I rarely finish them, and I don't actually think that is a negative about the game. It is more of a statement of me just wanting to play a bigger variety of games for the channel. One kind of big negative about Aftermath is the rulebook is really bad. The game is not complex. It's a pretty simple game, but the rulebook makes it feel way more complex and obtuse. And I know some fans have done a complete rewrite of the rulebook. And when I get back to the game, that's the rules I'm going to use. Okay, so number 47, and this is again from Fantasy Flight Games, and that is 2020's Fallout, and that is designer Dane Beltrami. And this is another caveat here, that is with the Atomic Bonds expansion. So this game has a fantastic quest system with a huge deck of cards that as you encounter different quests in different orders, you will be adding cards that you will visit, you will discover later in the game. You're continuing to add to this library of cards. And the kind of open-ended nature of a lot of them gets pretty close of emulating that Bethesda feel from the video games, and I really enjoy that part. There is a lot to discover within the 5, 6 or so handful of scenarios. There are things I've played the game a handful of times, maybe 7 or so times, and there are still things that I have never come across, and I don't even know how to discover them. Gameplay is pretty quick and snappy. It's a for being kind of it's weird. It's both fiddly and elegant in a way. There's a lot of moving pieces, but the game is pretty easy to learn and pretty easy to play. One of the big negatives of though about the game is the base game out of the box isn't great. I liked it more than a lot of people, but one thing is just the overall graphic design is really bland. There is not a lot of art, and especially in the quest cards, it's just all text. The colors are really muted and just not very inviting. It doesn't have a great look. It just looks kind of drab on the table. But that was number 47 with a Fallout. Number 46, we have Shadows of Malice from 2014, and that is from Devious Weasel Games. Kind of, I think, a one-man shop, designer Jim Felly. So Shadows of Malice it's a really abstract adventure game. It requires the players to bring a lot to the table. And because of this, though, it's very easy to create your own memorable moments from the things that your imagination brings to the table. It requires work on part of the players. It requires them to meet the game at a certain point that a lot of these games do not. There's also a ton of replayability in the game. There's basically just one scenario. You're trying to seal these portals and stop this Shadow Lord from advancing into the land. So you're kind of playing the same game each time. It's not scenario based, but within that framework, different things can happen. You can face different enemies, discover different pieces of loot and powers, and just have all these kind of weird little adventures. And it's also really easy to control the length of the game depending on how many boards you set up to play the game. So yeah, pretty cool. I wish that the minimal art direction, I wish that the designer had taken it 5 steps further, where instead of having just a little bit of subpar art, there was actually no art at all in the game. It was all just maybe text, very small amounts of text or icons. I think that would have actually served the purpose of the game even more in its abstract nature. Okay, so that was Shadows of Malice, number 46. 45, another Fantasy Flight game. I think most of the Fantasy Flight games are kind of down on the list. There will be at least one pretty high up. But this is Lord of the Rings, Journeys in Middle-earth, 2019, from Nathan I. Hadjick and Grace Hollingdoss. And this is, of course, the big app-driven game. I have not finished the campaign, but I want to go back to it. This is with the inclusion of that adventures mode, the relaxed timer mode in the app, where you can just kind of freely explore without the fear of things, of the clock ticking in the background and things happening to you. The game gives it's like a totally immersive experience using the sound from the app and the different encounters that you can have. The card play is interesting. You're kind of deck building and you're using a hand of cards like you would use dice to overcome skill checks. The characters all feel and play very differently. That's one thing I really like. Each character and how you can mix them with a class, and they have a certain set of skills is very interesting. The main faults with the game are there are too many tiles. It takes way too long to search through the tiles for the correct tile you need to lay out when the app tells you to. And I do not like how Fantasy Flight in their app-based games, how they still almost always rely on releasing a physical product to give us more digital product. Just expand. We have enough stuff for this game. We don't need more physical components for this stuff. Just give us more quests and more adventures, more random encounters in the app. And I would be much happier than having to buy full, more cardboard and more plastic. Okay, so 44 coming up here on the first Games Workshop game, and that is from 1989, and that is Advanced Hero Quest from designer Jervis Johnson, back when Games Workshop was actually crediting their single designers, something I wish they would do now. But this has one of the best rules systems for simulating dungeon exploration. It feels like, more so than just about any game, it feels like a dungeon toolbox. It feels like you can craft any kind of dungeon adventure using the rules from Advanced Hero Quest. The totally random nature is totally random, and it means that anything can happen. And sometimes, as some people have noted in my playthrough I did, sometimes that anything is nothing. And that's just kind of the nature of that game. Another huge bonus is that it has a gigantic bestiary right out of the box. Just all kinds of monsters that you can fight. So you will never be searching for more. You know, a lot of times we get these games and there's only like a few like little minions to fight, and you start seeing the same creatures over and over again. Advanced Hero Quest has a ton of variety. A couple of negatives is the boxed content is pretty bad. I think it is easily Games Workshop's worst boxed board game. It is so bad that nothing depicted on the cover is actually in the game. Really weird. You don't even get enough plastic minis to populate the pre-written dungeon that comes with the game. It's paltry. The stuff you get is really subpar. It's better to think of Advanced Hero Quest more as an expansion to Hero Quest, because all of the stuff shown on the cover of Advanced Hero Quest is actually in Hero Quest. So if you have Hero Quest, even if you have the new Hero Quest, you can use a lot of that new Hasbro Hero Quest stuff with Advanced Hero Quest. And I do recommend downloading the rules, which are you can get for free, not legally, but you can download the enhanced Advanced Hero Quest PDF. And also, I think it does a really bad job of scaling difficulty or telling the players how they are supposed to progress through the game. And I think that's something they handled better in a game we'll talk about a lot later. Okay, number 43. This is from 2014 from Beautiful Disaster Games, and that is Assault on Doomrock. Designers Tom Stasiak and Christopher Newdomsky. It's a weird game in that it's very thematic, but it is also somewhat abstract. You are moving from location to location, having an adventure, but the locations are just cards, they're not a board. And when you're doing combat, you're using these little discs, and you move the discs close to each other to be in melee, away from each other to be in ranged. It's a really interesting kind of different system to be both abstract and thematic at the same time. It has really interesting combat mechanisms. I love the combat in the game, even though it is too long. That is one of the negatives. This game is way too long for what it is. The new enhanced deluxe second edition will be hitting crowdfunding soon. I hope the designer addresses the length issue. And there are a ton of different options with different bosses and powers and character classes and items and monsters. There's all kinds of different things to do. But like I said, the game is way too long, and that is really unfortunate. At about half the length, I would play Assault on Doomrock a lot more. Number 42 is Tomb from 2008 from Aldrich Entertainment Group, AEG, and that is designer Tom Zenser. I just have like on my on my sheet here, I just have so much art, so many characters, so many cards, loot, traps, spells, monsters. This game has an abundance of stuff. At its core, it is a competitive dungeon crawl that is okay. But when you just kind of enter its world and just look at all the art, look at all the different, I mean, there are like 100 different characters, 200 or so different characters that all have unique art and stats and powers. There are stacks and stacks of encounters and traps and monsters and loot and spells. The only problem is the game is not, the game is not great. So why is it so high on my list? Why is it on my list at all? This is a game that is on the top 50 because I think it still has the potential to be amazing. It just needs the right person to come in and tweak it. I still like playing the game. I still like tinkering with my own little solo variant using kind of a variety of different solo methods from other people who are on BGG. And I think the game has a lot of really cool things to offer. Unfortunately, it hasn't reached its full potential yet. This is a game that I love based on its potential, even though it's super old. It's from the before times as well. But I'm holding on to hope that eventually I or somebody else cracks the co-op solo nut of Tomb and really makes it one of, like, I think it could be one of the all-time great games. Okay, and the last game for today, that is number 41, and that is from 2018, another Games Workshop game, and that is Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress. This has got to be Games Workshop's most supported specialty box board game. They went absolutely crazy with the expansions. They had decks of cards, they had extra minis, they had 2 or 3 big box expansions, a couple small box expansions. They had tons of articles in White Dwarf that were collected in a compendium. Just so much stuff and so much passion really went into this game. You can tell, it's pretty clear that Games Workshop, Blackstone Fortress had a special place in Games Workshop's heart. I haven't seen them be this dedicated and excited about a game in a really, really long time. Unfortunately, yes, most of the stuff, maybe all of it now, is super out of print and very expensive. And yes, that does suck. And I get it. I get that complaint about Games Workshop games. Unfortunately, you have to get the stuff when it is available, when it's new. And sometimes even that is hard. With Cursed City, there were pre-orders that went unfulfilled. I love the different campaigns in the game. Most of them are relatively short. They're manageable. Each one has certain little details that they offer that make them different from the others. I like how the non-combat encounters are mixed in with the deck of combat encounters, so you kind of never know what's coming up. And I like the way that the campaigns progress. My main complaint is the character progression is really lackluster. Your characters never really feel like they are changing over the course of the game. And I think I understand why they did that. It's to put a stop to power creep. They didn't want to just keep making the numbers get bigger for the heroes and the monsters. They wanted things more self-contained. And I think that would have worked okay if the various campaigns were even shorter. If they were like maybe 4 adventures and you would call it quits and then start over again, almost kind of like a roguelike video game. But the campaigns, even though they are kind of short, they are still long enough that I feel that I want a little more character progression. I want to get to know and kind of develop my characters a little more over the course of the campaigns. But yeah, so that was the top, the bottom top 10 of the 50. We had 50 Runebound at 3rd edition. At 49, we had Dungeoneer, Tomb of the Lich Lord. At 48, Aftermath. At 47, Fallout. At 46, Shadows of Malice. 45, Lord of the Rings, Journeys in Middle-earth. 44, Advanced Hero Quest. 43, Assault on Doomrock. 42, Tomb. And 41, Warhammer Quest, Blackstone Fortress. All right, guys, so stay tuned. Hopefully sometime this week or next weekend, we will have part 2 of the Dungeon Dives top 50 games of all time. Take it easy. Bye-bye.